Immigration politics intensify in Ohio. Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Joseph Moss of the Ohio Hispanic Coalition, Laura Bischoff, State House reporter for the USA Today Ohio Network, and Mark Weaver, Republican strategist. Ohio is far from the Mexican border, but polls show that immigration is an important topic to Ohio voters, and it's becoming a bigger issue in Ohio politics. Last week's mass shooting at a Buffalo supermarket has cast new attention on rhetoric from some Republican candidates. Authorities say a white gunman may have been inspired by replacement rhetoric when he killed 10 black people. The replacement theory claims, without evidence, that there is a plot by Democrats to replace white voters with people of color and immigrants. U.S. Senate candidate J.D. Vance has also pointed to what he calls an immigrant invasion.
And you have to ask yourself who's benefiting from this and who's getting rich from it. And there's two big answers. First of all, Chamber of Commerce style Republicans and Democrats who love the cheap labor, who love the fact that these immigrants are displacing America's workers, but also Democrat politicians who have decided that they can't win re-election in 2022 unless they bring in a large number of new voters to replace the voters that are already here.
Mark Weaver, given what happened in Buffalo and the rising racial tension, should J.D. Vance walk that statement back?
No, I think discussing immigration policy is always fair game. This replacement theory, to the extent that some white supremacists embrace it, is horrific, of course. Racial obsession in any direction is horrific. But discussing immigration policy about who we should let in, how many we should let in, whether we should enforce the laws that are currently on the books, and whether we can afford to spend money for social services for hundreds of thousands of new people here when so many of our people are hurting. These are all valid things for candidates to discuss.
But that's not what he was talking about. He was saying Democrats are bringing in immigrants to replace voters. Of course, as we saw in 2020, a lot of times immigrant voters don't vote Democratic.
That's right.
It's not immigration policy, it was more of,
it's curious that the Democratic Party wants to have a path to citizenship to people who broke the law to get here. That's probably because they do think there's more likely to have more Democratic voters that way. That's not replacement theory. That is understanding Democratic politics. The replacement theory is kind of an odious, racially obsessed thing that we saw from this Buffalo shooter. But let's recall, whether it's white supremacy that we saw in Buffalo, or the black supremacist shooter in the New York subway, or what we saw in Waukesha, or in the cop killer in L.A., or in the fellow who attacked the Capitol and ran over a Capitol police officer, it's odious whenever we racially obsess on things. And I worry that we're taking the responsibility away from the people who ought to be held accountable, which are the criminals who do these horrific acts.
Joe, are Democrats twisting J.D. Vance's words?
Absolutely not. And as a matter of fact, J.D. Vance is lying. As a matter of fact, most of the people that are raising this issue as it being some kind of Democratic Party-inspired movement are just flat out lying through their teeth. Even if you were to enter today, there's no way you're going to be able to vote in the 2022 elections. The most friendly legislation that has been offered by the Democrats in the Senate to date is one that would put immigrants on a path to citizenship after 8 years. So that is the absolute fastest that anybody could be. Now, if J.D. Vance or Republicans are concerned about losing those people, and you were absolutely right, Mike, because in the case of Cubans and Venezuelans, they might very well vote over whoever appears to be more conservative. So that can certainly happen. But that is a lie about being able to vote.
Laura Bischoff, that interview happened before the primary, I believe, when all of the candidates were sort of using this argument. They were hyping the immigration, building the wall, wanted to build Trump's wall. Do you expect J.D. Vance to sort of back away from that a little bit politically now that he's won the primary and needs to attract independent voters?
It's unclear to me what J.D. Vance is planning on doing. I would say that, he said that immigrants are replacing American workers, but for the most part, a lot of people who come in as immigrant workers, they're taking jobs that Americans won't take. Farm labor work, cleaning hotel rooms, busing tables, et cetera. And given how tough the labor market is right now, there's a lot of businesses that rely on immigrant labor.
Mark Weaver, we're not far from the Canadian border. It's right up north, but we don't have issues with the Canadian border like Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and California have. Why is immigration suddenly such a big issue here? Is it because Donald Trump made it a big issue?
It's been an issue for some time. There's no question that President Trump brought more focus to it, but we don't have people lining up on the Canadian border to come into our country as we do on the southern border, and we have oceans on either side, so the focus is where the people are coming. And as I said earlier, it's a fair question for debate about how many people we want to have come in and whether you give advantage to people who break our current laws. Remember, these folks are breaking our current laws, as opposed to the immigrants who filled out the paperwork, paid the fees, waited patiently, and then came in through our laws. And it's a fair public debate as to whether they ought to be treated differently when they get here.
I think we've lost touch with a reality in this, because it's not everybody in Mexico, El Salvador, and Guatemala that is trying to cross the border. This is an issue, actually, of income inequality and failing to distribute resources in their own country. And those are the people that are attempting to come in, the poor, the dispossessed. And so we need to keep that in mind as to why it isn't that perhaps Canadian are coming over here, because they can afford to live in Canada.
One of the things that J.D. Vance actually mentioned in one of his ads, and others have, is that border security does affect the drug trade, and that we, of course, have been hit hard by the opioid crisis. So that is an issue that you could connect to immigration and border security, right, Laura?
Yeah, although I was reading in the New York Times just recently about how synthetic opioids manufactured in laboratories rather than grown out on fields are really kind of the big trouble spot, and the reason why we're seeing so many overdose deaths.
So it's like fentanyl, that kind of thing.
Fentanyl, yeah, it's synthetic. It's manufactured. It's not like heroin comes from poppies and marijuana from cannabis plants, and so that can be grown, or that could be manufactured just about anywhere, and the transport of it is a lot easier.
Yeah, it was a big. Rob Portman argued that they needed tighter restrictions on China because it was coming in from the mail, via the mail to Ohio. Anyway, our next topic: Republican lawmakers want to put immigration on the fall ballot. They are proposing a constitutional amendment that would prohibit non-U.S. citizens from voting in local elections. The move comes after New York City moved to allow immigrants who are legal permanent residents to vote in city elections. Critics, including the ACLU, say the new amendment is not needed because the Constitution and state law already bar non-citizens from voting. Among those who said the Constitution already bars it is Secretary of State Frank LaRose. In 2020, LaRose stepped in to stop the village of Yellow Springs from allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections. His press release at the time touted that only U.S. citizens may vote in Ohio, but LaRose says he still supports this new amendment proposal. Joe Mas, what do you think is the motivation behind this? Why not, if there's any, Ohio is a home rule state. And the home rule is, of course, enforced selectively at the state legislature. But if there's a chance that a city might allow non-citizens to vote, why not put it in the Constitution?
Well, because the law prohibits it already. It says that in order to be an elector in the state of Ohio, you have to be a citizen. Look, this is part of a broader narrative that has been going on not forever, but for a long time. It included the loyalty oaths during the time of the Cold War and shortly before. The English as official language bills in the 90s, and the anti-Sharia law immediately after Trump's era. So that it has to do with, it's a touchstone, it's a sense of identity and a way to bring out the constituency that are, let's face it, anti-immigrant.
Is this a way to bring out conservatives in November, Mark, to vote against this?
I think a lot of people turn out. I think it'll pass about 75-25. Let's let the voters decide. This is not just New York. Maryland has done this. Vermont has done this. California has done this. And have a belt and suspenders approach to make sure that non-citizens cannot vote in the elections of this country, and certainly in this state, is a fair public policy question. And I think we should all welcome the voters being able to make that decision.
But if it's already in the Constitution.
It's not in the Constitution expressly. And by putting it in the Constitution expressly, it will mean there won't be long court battles about what the Constitution means by looking and inferring things. By making it explicit, it makes it very clear what our policy is.
I think there's some politics, underlying politics that are going on with this. I think that this kind of ballot issue would, of course, just kind of stoke the conservative turnout. And at the same time, the legislature and the regulate marijuana like alcohol came to an agreement over a dispute about whether or not the signatures were turned in time to delay that one. So, and that ballot issue, I think, would drive Democrats and younger voters to the polls. So I think maybe the Republicans are considering ways to drive their voters and, kind of push back on Democrats who might come up.
And Frank LaRose has been drifting further to the right over the past year or two, with possible eye on another race down the road, Sherrod Brown's Senate seat, for instance. This is a way to bona fide his credentials.
Yeah, I mean, I think Frank LaRose is a young guy. I think he's like 42 or 43 years old. He's got a long runway ahead of him. So, I wouldn't be surprised if he ran first U.S. Senate.
And I agree with Mark. I think that if this thing were to get on the ballot, it would pass by a huge percentage because it's assumed that you're not going to do that. And so would a constitutional amendment making the U.S. dollar the official currency in the state of Ohio, or oxygen as the official gas in the state of Ohio.
All Fridays off.
Yeah, something like that.
Now, let's look at the issue. I mean, New York is saying that if you're a legal permanent resident, green card holder, you live in the city, you pay taxes, your kids go to the public schools, your life is affected by the decisions that your local politicians make. Is there an argument that those folks should have a vote?
Sure, I think it's a valid ethical argument. I don't know that the nation is at that spot, especially with where we are with the whole issue of who is an American. Not only are we talking about who is an American, but who is a heritage American, who is a real American. So I think that, look, everything has its time. And now is not necessarily the time to be focusing on that, other than for political gain.
Mark, what do you think about that? Is it similar to college students can vote in the city where they're going to school, in the state where they're going to school, even if they've moved out of state? But they don't have any real stake in like a local election, like a teacher's, or levy or something like that. Should the same rule apply to legal permanent residents? Should they have a voice?
A college student who tried to vote in two different places would be breaking the law, but somebody who's a citizen of another country is entitled to vote in those elections as well as these elections. Nobody wants to see that happen.
Laura Bischoff, does this get on the ballot? It's kind of in limbo right now.
Well, I think I think it's a calculus that the Republicans need to make and determine.
Yeah, they're in the process of hearings and things like that. All right. Lawmakers this week heard testimony in support of a so-called trigger law to ban nearly all abortions in Ohio. It would go into effect if the U.S. Supreme Court overturns the Roe versus Wade decision, which it seems poised to do based on the leaked draft majority opinion. Democrats in the legislature say they will introduce a proposed amendment to the Ohio Constitution that would guarantee a woman's right to an abortion. The GOP-controlled legislature likely would reject that, which means that it might be up to voters to decide. Laura Bischoff, where are we on the so-called trigger law? There was a hearing this week. There are more hearings scheduled.
Yeah, so Matt Huffman told my colleague Jesse Balmer, and actually I think other press in a gaggle this week, that he didn't see a need to pass that right away. And so that means they're going to probably go on summer break. The Roe decision will be released in that interim. And then when they come back, either during lame duck or maybe a little bit before that, they'll determine how they want to handle that. And I kind of think that probably they'll drop the trigger part of it and just go with a ban. And very likely they would pass that in lame duck rather than just before the election.
Did you give a reason? Is it because the decision is looming in? There's indications that they may overturn it anyway, that they're just going to wait to see what it looks like?
Well, always the lawyer. He wanted to see the decision and read it before he makes that decision.
Is it a foregone conclusion that the Ohio legislature will take this trigger law? Basically, abortion is illegal except when the health and life of the mother is at stake.
It's not a foregone conclusion as to what the wording of the law will say. I think it's a pretty good bet that they are going to vote to, in some form or fashion, prohibit abortion in Ohio, given that most of the legislators in the House and Senate have come out in favor of such a law. And now that the U.S. Supreme Court appears to allow the door to be open to such a law, I think it's a good bet that Ohio will pass that, and that the governor, probably the most pro-life governor we've ever had, Mike DeWine, will sign that bill.
Is there a risk of not having this trigger bill, and looking at it from the perspective of somebody who opposes abortion rights, to get this on paper, get it done, get it signed now? The opinion comes out, there's reaction to it, there's variance in the opinion. The law might not be as strong as, really strict abortion rights opponents would favor.
I think the Senate president made the right decision. He wants to see what the decision says to make sure that the law is crafted properly. There's going to be lawsuits. There will be lawsuits. And so writing the legislation as carefully as possible makes sense.
And Joe Mas, the heartbeat law is already ready to go if they do overturn it.
Yeah, and what I was thinking is that I think that the Democrats in the General Assembly actually have not gone far enough. I think what should be proposed is an equal rights amendment that includes choice as part of it. I think that the argument is tit for tat. You need to go all the way on this and ensure the rights of women, not only over their own bodies, but also with respect to the panoply of rights that should be theirs.
Laura Bischoff, the Democrats are considering, they're promising an amendment to the proposed amendment to the Constitution that would guarantee abortion rights and also guarantee rights to contraception. But they haven't put anything down on paper yet, correct? We don't know exactly what the details are?
Yeah, I think the details are TBD. But also, the Democrats don't have a lot of power in the legislature, stating the obvious there. So I don't know how they're going to manage this unless they get people to go out and collect signatures. So this is, and that's a big undertaking. And another route would be to try to do a referendum on any ban law that the legislature passes. But the trap on that is that lawmakers can just replace it with another slightly tweaked ban, and it becomes like a hamster wheel.
And let's remember that we talked about changing the citizenship language in the Constitution as a Republican effort to stoke the base. Let's be very clear. All the things we've been talking about the Democrats are suggesting is a nod to their base and a way to energize their base in a year that's shaping up to be a very strong Republican year.
But that's not the only reason. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do. They're not doing it just to bring out the base.
In their view, it's the right thing to do, and people saying that only citizens can vote in the election is the right thing to do.
You can't compare one to the other.
Sure, they're both talking about people's rights, and they're both correct from the viewpoint of the legislators who are advancing that view.
Well, I disagree. I don't think that they're both talking about people's rights.
What should be, Joe Mas, what should be in the Democratic amendment? Should it be abortion is legal up to?
I'm glad
up to birth, or should they say
no.
15 weeks, 20 weeks, 12 weeks? Should they put a time on there? Because on that side of the movement,
I will admit, as a man, it's probably not even appropriate for me to get in the weeds of this, but I'll answer your question. I think the consensus among the population is that you're talking about the original Roe versus Wade concept of trimesters. And the first trimester, it's a private matter and so on. 20 weeks seems to be a figure that has been mentioned by Republicans. And I do think that it's a mistake for Democrats to leave it open-ended, because then it gives the impression that what you're doing is terminating life that would otherwise be able to survive. And that's probably not right.
Mark, the earliest this would go to the ballot would be likely 2024. What would this campaign look like? Would a statewide ballot settle this issue? I look at Ireland in 2018. They voted 66% to 33% to make abortion legal up to 12 weeks. Roman Catholic, socially conservative Ireland, 2/3 of the folks supported that. Is that a path to settle this issue?
Given that Roe v. Wade being overturned will not outlaw abortion, but it will allow every state to do what it likes, and given blue states like New York, like Maryland, others will cling to the right to an abortion, I don't think this will be as big as an issue as if Roe versus Wade were to outlaw abortion across the country. And so it will be less convenient for some Ohio women who want to get an abortion, because they'll have to go to Maryland or go to New York or go to Michigan or go to wherever they're going to go. But there will be numerous pro-abortion groups that will pay to bring them there by airplane or by bus.
It's more than inconvenience if you can't afford to travel, though.
Oh no, these groups will pay for that. There's actually cities in California saying that they will offer abortion scholarships to people who want to come there. So there'll be a whole infrastructure to advance the killing of unborn babies.
It's not a matter of inconvenience. People who have means will be able to make those trips, and for the most part, people large swaths of low-income women will not be able to make
These
those.
scholarships, there will be. There will be an express effort to actually pay for people to go to
You
these
admit
states.
it's not as easy as walking
Oh, thank
across
goodness,
town.
because again, I think it's wrong. I think it's the intentional killing of innocent human life. So yeah, it should be inconvenient to kill innocent human life. Yeah.
All right. Our final topic, the bail reform debate has come to the State House and may go to the voters. Following a controversial Ohio Supreme Court decision and other reforms implemented by the court, Republican lawmakers proposed changing the state constitution to allow judges to consider public safety when setting bail. Supporters say the proposed amendment will keep violent offenders off the streets. Opponents say high bail penalizes low-income defendants and steps on the rights of the accused before they are actually convicted. Laura Bischoff, this came out of what prompted the latest action was a case out of Cincinnati that got the attention of the Attorney General and other prosecutors.
Well, it's the DuBose case. It started in Cincinnati. The guy got a very high bond, and he complained. His attorney complained about it. It was lowered, and then the grandmother of the victim came in and said, "I don't feel safe with this guy out." Then they bumped the bond back up again, and so it went through. He appealed, and then it went to the Ohio Supreme Court. It was a 4-3 decision. Maureen O'Connor joined the Democrats on it, and they said you can't use cash bail just to keep somebody in behind bars before trial, and that you can only use that to assure that they're going to show up, and that there's still other means in which to hold people pre-trial, depending on what the and you guys are lawyers, not me, but depending on what the charge is, so you can keep super dangerous people behind bars. But this really is it kind of brings together issues of fairness, safety, and constitutional rights.
Mark, what is the balance between protecting the public safety and the rights of the accused? Should high bail be used if the judge considers this person to be dangerous?
Well, in addition to being a prosecutor, over the years I've been both a magistrate in mayor's court and then an acting judge in municipal court. And so I've sat in the role of someone who has to make this balance. All this would do is allow judges to add one more factor to their consideration, which is the public safety. And I personally don't want to see anybody who is presumed innocent of a nonviolent crime, and simply because they don't have the money, they shouldn't languish in jail until their trial. But I also don't want somebody who we know is going to be dangerous, as it risked to the public, let out because the judge was unable to consider that as a factor. So just another factor for the judge.
Joe, you're a defense attorney. Your take on it?
I am. Well, no, what I'm actually perplexed at is that this is an issue that has been under consideration by the General Assembly in order to make it more equitable among people of different resources. And bipartisan effort. And then all of a sudden, you've got Dave Yost bringing this up, thinking that somehow money is going to guarantee that people are going to be safe or not. So then we could have dangerous criminals that can afford to get out versus those that cannot. The decision from the Supreme Court had to do with money being the determining factor, not safety of the community, like Laura said. They can always hold somebody in under those conditions. So I don't know what it's about.
To Joe's point, this has the support, bail reform has the support of the Buckeye Institute, which is a very conservative group here in Ohio, and the ACLU, which is obviously tends to be more on the liberal side, not always, but they defend rights.
Right, Joe's right. It's been an issue that's been debated in the State House for a number of years, and it is an issue that makes kind of strange bedfellows.
Mark, when you look at these cases, William Husel, the doctor who was just acquitted of murder, he was charged with 25 murders. He got out $1 million bail. Is that a man who was charged with killing 25 people? Was that a high enough bail for him? He did show up, and he.
Yeah, part of what the judge has to consider is that person likely to go out and endanger the community the next week. I mean, imagine we saw this shooter on 71 who's running down 71, shooting randomly at every car on 71. That's somebody who's a danger. The very next day, that person could be out shooting again. So just allowing the judge to take that into account, along with these other factors, is what the constitutional amendment is going to suggest, and I think most voters will agree with that.
Joe, how would you weigh those two cases?
Let me tell you what the problem is. It's that in most of these cases, you have, and Mark is absolutely correct, when you have a case, somebody running down the highway shooting people. The problem is that most of these cases actually are of a personal nature. The people know each other. They're part of the neighborhood. And then the families come out. Those supporting the defendant and then those supporting the victim. And that's the reason that the whole issue, make it high so that the guy or gal can't come out and bother our family.
Or, yeah. Thorny issue. Anyway, time for our off-the-record parting shots. Mark Weave, you're up first.
We started the show talking about the replacement theory, which is the big talk this week. But the real replacement theory is the Democrats in Congress who are worried about being replaced by the Republicans. So prominent Democrat activist on MSNBC, Donnie Deutsch, gave away the game this week when he said, quote, "We don't have the economy on our side, so we need to use the Buffalo shooting to scare the bejesus out of voters to get them to vote Democrat." That's despicable, and it's an example of how partisan this has become.
Laura.
So I would just say that voters should be on the lookout for this bail issue to be prominently displayed in the Ohio Supreme Court race. The Chief Justice position and 2 justices are up, and so the balance of the court is up for grabs.
Interesting. And Joe.
You know, J.D. Vance didn't just talk about the immigrants falsely coming in and voting, but he also has said that the Democrats are out to destroy the country, and that that is what we need to do. So let's follow Abraham Lincoln's challenge. We are not enemies, we're friends. Though passion have tested our bonds, we must seek not to break them, but to reach out to the better angels of our nature.
Well, good luck with that, Joe. We'll get there. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Continue the conversation on Facebook, and as a reminder, you can watch us anytime on demand at our website, WOSU.org, and through the PBS app. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.